Hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to provide you context in the war in Ukraine. The big story today, the one that I want to focus on is what's actually happening to the Russian economy. Is the ruble melting down, or is the economy imploding? Now, I have four big stories, and that's going to be the first one. But I want to do a little bit of a history lesson first before we get there. So when Merkel from Germany left office, Russia accounted for 55% of German gas imports, up from 40%, so that 15% more, that's a lot, when she became chancellor. Only 1 year after Russia's annexation of Crimea, Nord Stream 2 was signed. So after the 2014 invasion, they still went and signed Nord Stream 2. Now, Trump was always arguing, this is a terrible thing, don't do this, you're going to get too dependent. As a businessman, it was probably pretty clear to him, this is not a good place to be. Now, the reason why is Porter's five forces. This is a very common thing in the business literature. So the threat of new entrants, the threat of substitutes, bargaining power of buyers and bargaining power of suppliers, and then rivalry among existing competitors. If you understand these five forces, you can understand a lot in business. But what Merkel wasn't understanding was that the bargaining power of suppliers, that is Russia. Russia had great power over Germany after Germany was so beholden to them for gas. But as we look at this, it's also not just gas, it's oil. Russia's economy is basically a third powered by fossil fuels. Now, who's buying Russia's fossil fuels? And the answers are really interesting. You might say China, you might say India, but there's more to the story than that. Who's buying Russia's coal? China, India, Turkey, South Korea. Who's buying their crude oil? China. By a long margin, China. Then India. They're buying it as fast as they can get it. The EU is buying some, and Turkey. And then who's buying their liquefied natural gas? EU is the largest in buying liquefied natural gas. Then China and Japan. Who's buying their oil products? Turkey, China, Brazil, Singapore, India. Who's buying their pipeline gas? EU, and then China, and then Turkey. Okay, so that gives you a picture of who's doing what and who's actually the culprits. But let's just look at China and India in fact, China. Let's just think about China in this one. Okay, Kazakhstan is aiming to boost their oil exports through this place I can't pronounce, pipeline. I'm not even going to try that. Targeting 1.5 million tons in 2024 with plans to reach 20 million annually in the future. This move would reduce the more than 80% share of its flows that it currently sends through Russia. So where's Kazakhstan? So Kazakhstan sends it through Russia right now. But if they go through the Caspian Sea into this pipeline here, right? That's how they're going to send it from this point forward. That's going to hurt because it's going to take some revenue away from Russia for the pipeline itself. And guess who else is going to hurt Russia, accidentally at least? Trump. This isn't meaning to. This is just a byproduct of what he's already going to do for his domestic policy. Trump prepares wide-ranging energy plan to boost gas exports, oil drilling, sources say. Now, if you're Captain Planet, you're probably not really that excited about this plan, but if you want to see Russia hurt, this is an exciting plan. Donald Trump's transition team is putting together a wide-ranging energy package to roll out within days of his taking office that would approve export permits for new liquefied natural gas products and increase oil drilling off the U.S. coast and on federal lands. So what's that going to do? When the price of oil and gas drop, it's going to hurt the Russian economy. In fact, everything that we're talking about is talking about what's going to hurt the Russian economy. Right now, it's a shock of the escalation hurting the Russian economy. The long-range missiles and then even the ICBM, I think, is affecting what's happening to the ruble dropping right now. Monday, the ruble opened at $1 to 104 rubles. That's over 100. So essentially, it's at about a penny, a little less than the penny for every ruble. Okay, so Tuesday was 106. Halfway through Wednesday, it's at 110. The ruble lost 5.5% of its value in 2.5 business days. Now, you got to look at the trend. It's kind of like if you step on a scale, you can't necessarily believe when you step on a scale immediately. You have to look for the trend line. Maybe you had a big meal. Maybe you're retaining water. Maybe you sweated and went the other way, and you worked out and sweated a lot. And wow, look at me. I'm a lot less than I think. You got to look for the trend line. But the trend line, at least in the short run here, has been pretty pretty bad for Russia. Only 30 minutes of trading so far this morning, and the ruble is again getting absolutely obliterated at 106, says Jay in Kyiv. Anna from Ukraine even had a hashtag of Russian ruble roulette. How about that? And then by the end of the day, it got as far as 113. So yeah, this is just like it's 1 day trade. This is 1 day. It started at 105 and ended here at 113. So the ruble is not looking that hot right now. Okay. Jay, now let's switch gears a little bit. Even before the Russian central bank's planned December interest rate hike, average yield on corporate debt is already at 25% and going vertical. Current trajectory has 32% by January 1st. Another bad sign. Does this mean that the economy is going to implode? I can't say that. I don't know. I don't see enough to be able to say that definitively, but these are all unhealthy signs. And I'm looking for positive signs. This is the misery of this. I can't see what I can't see, but I am trying to find positive signs, and I'm not seeing very many of those. So, okay, even trending on Twitter, trending in political figures, Russian bank collapse is trending on Twitter right now. So, okay, shares of leading Russian developers continue to fall. This is real estate developers. Yesterday, down 9.3%. Today, down 11%. Year to date, 75%. So it looks like a major crisis is looming in Russia's real estate market. And what we try to do is we try to triangulate on facts from different perspectives. So if that's the case, then you would expect something like this. Migrants are leaving Russia because salaries are no longer attractive, partly because of the ruble, but partly because they're out of work, because the industry is not building more because they can't get the loans, and right? So Russian construction industry is facing a shortage of 300,000 workers. Now, they don't have workers for other reasons as well. The reasons are 20% fall in the ruble in 3 months, which makes salaries less profitable, and the tightening of immigration laws, and workers are being pulled off to other places, and so on and so forth, right? So State Duma experts are already recording massive outflow of foreign labor. Now, if they stick around, they might have a whole different problem set, so I would argue get out of the country as quickly as you can. Now, shares of Russia's Gazprom have plummeted to a historic low, trading around $1. Now, that dollar is because the one to about 100 rubles, so it's really 100 or so, a little over 100 rubles. But if we click on this, 114 rubles here at its height, it was like 380, almost 400 rubles at its height. When was its height? About the time, maybe just before the invasion, right? Okay, so yeah. All right. I've become a great fan of Steve Rosenberg, and he does this little thing where he looks at Russian newspapers to see how they're carrying things. We're going to listen to about a minute or two of this.
Even in what is a highly controlled media environment, there is still room in the Russian papers to talk about the country's economic problems. You read about these every day now. So, on its front page today, Moskovsky Komsomolets complains about potato prices, which have gone up 74% since the start of the year.
We're literally talking about potatoes in a newspaper as being too expensive.
And there's a warning about the spectre of stagflation, a combination of high inflation and low economic growth. There are objective signs that Russia's economy is sliding inexorably towards the alarming reality older generations recall from the 1990s. It seems that the spectre of stagflation is not simply looming, it's knocking at the door of our economy very hard.
It's here. Russians are experiencing it, but they can put up with a lot of pain. So that doesn't mean that they're going to march in the streets and throw out Putin or anything like that. Don't fool yourself. That's not right around the corner.
And there is clearly a battle going on. It's actually playing out in public between business elites demanding lower interest rates and the Russian central bank that may raise rates even higher than they are now. The government...
And that's the thing that really caught my attention here, that the business elites want the lower interest rate so that they can function, and the bank is trying to push it down to fight inflation, and okay.
Paper Российская Gazeta points out that in Russia, inflationary expectations remain high, as does the rate at which prices are rising, which is why the central bank may increase interest rates to 22 or 23% in December. The high central bank interest rate hurts business, but it is necessary to battle inflation, which hits socially disadvantaged groups hardest.
Okay, so that's where Russia is right now. All right, just a little bit more, and we're going to switch gears a little bit by looking at what's going on with China. So China's taking advantage of Russia bit by bit, according to Anton Gershchenko. Moscow, weakened by sanctions, is turning to Beijing for help. Help comes with strings attached. Yet they have this going on friendship, like this undeniable friendship or long-term friendship or unbreakable friendship. It's friendship on paper, but it's a way for China to get access to cheap raw materials and exports its surplus machinery and consumer goods back to Russia. So it gets all the oil and it has a market to push all of its cheap machinery. So China, for them, it's a good deal. Well, kind of, and I'll explain why in just a moment, turning a very good profit. Russia oil and gas are the most obvious and common examples of this quasi-colonial relationship. China is expanding to other resources as well. China has become a hub for Russian gold. Russia is the second largest gold producer in the world, has resorted to using its sizable gold reserves to avoid sanction by offering gold as barter for goods. Like that's what they're doing in Russia. Exports of Russian diamonds to China through Hong Kong have increased 18-fold year on year. But China also runs the risk of becoming what Germany was and becoming too beholden to Russia if they're not careful. So they have to be very measured about that. Okay, let's go to our next big story. Ukraine received $4.8 billion from the United States as part of the peace project. It says cabinet and ministers. I think this is terrible, and I'll explain why. That $4.8 billion for the peace project, these funds are aimed at supporting the implementation of reforms as well as restoration of the country, shouldn't come from the US for that. $4.8 billion would be far better spent in military surplus, military machinery, military rockets, missiles, those kinds of things, ammunition, tanks, whatever it is. They shouldn't be using this money here. Let somebody else pay for that somewhere else and you get military weapons from this. Now, the principle here is you use your highest best use to be as efficient as possible. So if you own a house on a busy thoroughfare that's a commercial zone, you don't want to live in that house. You want to rent that house out to a business because you can get higher rent by doing that, right? So it's the same kind of principle here, where if you're going to spend that 4.8 billion, far better for, at least from the United States, for it to come from military, but that's not what's going to happen. Now, here's what is going to happen. President Biden has asked the U.S. Congress to allocate an additional $24 billion for military aid to Ukraine and a replenishment of American weapons sent to Kyiv. According to Politico, of this, $16 billion goes to replenishing U.S. stockpiles. $8 billion is designated for Ukraine. Now, if it does pass, only $8 billion is we can only count on $8 billion more going to Ukraine. We don't know what Trump will do after that. That's if this is even passed. So, and I think this is a smart way of trying to put this forward. Like, what's the calculus here? Because it's hard for folks to vote against the $16 billion to replenish our own stockpiles in Congress, even if they have to vote for the $8 billion that they don't want to vote for those that are maybe going to say, we shouldn't be sending more to Ukraine. Now, for those that want to send more to Ukraine, this is too little, and I get that, I understand, but I think that's the strategy here. Okay, meanwhile, Congressman McCall, I highlighted him twice already, but I haven't shown you this little clip, and this is a really good clip. Let's just hear what he has to say.
As you know, the greatest sin and weakness of the Budapest Agreement, which took all the deterrence away from Ukraine to give up all their nuclear weapons, had no enforcement mechanism, so that when they gave all their weapons up, what happened after that? Then Russia moved into the Donbass and Crimea with no enforcement, and we betrayed Ukraine. The world stage, NATO, betrayed Ukraine at that moment. So if ever a negotiation's entered into again, you have to have enforcement.
That's exactly right. There was no enforcement mechanism, and so we betrayed Ukraine, and we need to make good on that promise. Okay, Donald Trump may leverage $300 billion in frozen Russian assets to pressure Russia into a peace deal, said an expert. I don't know if he will or won't. This is just a theory. The sum may convince Russia that Ukraine could withstand the war of attrition. But we don't know. This was carried in the Euromaidan press. We just don't know, and it's too early to tell. But we do know this. Dmytro Kuleba said, Zelensky cannot sign a deal where Russia takes the entire Donbass, Ukraine gives up Crimea, and NATO aspirations. It's against the Constitution and it would end him politically. So, no deal like that. Even if Trump says we will withdraw all our aid, uh, no deal like that can be entered into. Now, he added that Putin isn't seeking peace, but he believes that Trump could weaken Ukraine's resistance. So it's more about, it's not about Putin stopping this peace deal. It's about whether the West will weaken and stop supporting Ukraine. Meanwhile, Romanians, this is the last story, Romanians are taking to the streets in various cities across the country to send a clear message to the openly fascist pro-Russian candidate. Better dead than fascist is what they're saying. Expect these demonstrations to spread and grow exponentially until round 2 of the election, which is coming up. I talked about this the other day, and this NATO growing a spine in Russian economy is closer to crisis. In this video, my 3 big stories yesterday, but many of Georgescu's voters were young. Many found out about him on TikTok. And he's from an unknown party, and you have the guy from one unknown party going against somebody from another unknown party. And when people tell me that, like, I don't understand your two-party system in the United States, I don't understand how you have people from some party nobody has ever heard of. That's actually the two winning or leading candidates are from parties that nobody ever heard of. Like, okay, it's just a different system. Now, this was really interesting. The Simpsons have called a lot of things. They've been prescient over time. There's this little clip of The Simpsons where this Russian delegate is saying, Moscow would like to do this. The dollar to the ruble is 1 to 7. And then his beeper or his phone beeps and he looks at it and he says, 1 to 12. And then beeps again and he goes, 1 to 60. And it beeps again. He's like, 1 to 1,000. And then he runs out of the room. Like, that feels like where we are. Okay, last little bit, Darth Putin. In the last 2 weeks, the ruble has fallen 15% in value. I remain master strategist. All right, my friends, that's all that I have for you today. Again, I'm not telling you that the sky is falling on Russia. I don't know that. But here's what we do know. And thank you for listening to me. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.